Well, I can see a sign on my screen that says that we're broadcasting to all attendees. So welcome everybody to this conversation. My name's Chris. I work at the Barbican in London, and I'm really delighted to be in conversation this afternoon with Chris and Sam and Hildur, who are responsible for the Chernobyl project, which has two arms to it at the moment: the original television soundtrack recording, and of course the live concert, and that's three, I suppose, because there's now a film of the live concert. So this project now has developed three kind of interwoven arms, and we're going to have a
explosion.
Hopefully we're going to have a chat about all three of those things. I just wanted to start right from the beginning, when you were initially invited to make this work, this piece's composition. What was your process like? Presumably you don't get to see footage from the show at that point. You have to start working based on atmosphere, or tell me your first introduction, I suppose.
Yeah, so I was contacted before they started shooting. So I read the script before they started shooting anything, and so I knew that Sam and I were going to work together, so we were bouncing ideas around for quite a while before, and it was like really clear from the beginning that that like this series really needed to be like it really needed to be like kind of bound in reality. Like it needed to be not over dramatizing anything that happened, because these events, I mean, they're so important to our history, really, and it's really important that I felt it was really important that that the music wasn't kind of turning it into some sort of like thriller, that it was really kind of bound in the space and in the actual tangible places or like feelings, and I think one of the main things that was quite obvious from the beginning also is that like the radiation was the element that was they weren't going to be able to film, and so we felt that like it was really important that the radiation was kind of portrayed through the music, and to be able to go about working in such a way, I feel like you really have to understand what it is that you're trying to turn into sound, turn into music. So I really wanted to go and capture the power plant basically, and the original idea was to go to Chernobyl to record, but that turned out to be a little bit complicated, so to say the least, because also the spaces that we wanted to capture were kind of, the off limits spaces, because you can't go to Chernobyl as a kind of tourist, and there's certain spaces that you can access, but the real kind of radioactive stuff we wouldn't really have been able to access. So we went to Lithuania, to a power plant called Ignalina, and it was also clear that to go into such a space with the limitations that are in place for recordings and timings and like the kind of general pace and atmosphere of this sort of recording, we needed help of an expert to be able to capture that. So Chris has been a really dear friend for a long time. We've been on the same label for a really long time, and we've worked together off and on for the last, I guess, decade plus. So it was really clear that the only person that could possibly be right for this job was the master himself, Chris Watson. So he luckily was kind enough to join the project. So the three of us went to Ignalina to record, and I think we really went just like into the space we weren't really sure at all what was going to come out of these recordings. We just went in there with open ears and just listen to what the space had to say, and so we recorded quite a few hours of material, and we had to work around all sorts of crazy circumstances, like we're in a power plant and we were completely unable to get any electricity or something. Like, we spent half the time waiting for some engineer to bring some sort of like ancient adapter for some like Soviet Union plug. No, it's just like this really interesting things that we kind of ran into on this trip. But it was we ended up really capturing a lot of great material, and these recordings ended up being the pretty much the only sound source of the whole music for the whole series. So we managed to really turn the power plant, so to say, into a musical instrument that was able to carry the whole score.
So the power plant was disused, right? There was no electricity being generated in the plant. Is that right? Or
decommissioned? It was in the process of being decommissioned.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a 25-year long process.
So there were still objects in the space which you could hit and get sounds out of, and did you literally just walk around kind of hitting things and twanging things, or was it more about the acoustic than the objects?
We did try a couple of hits, but then it became clear to us quite early on in the recording process that kind of activating the power plant by hitting stuff and banging on stuff wasn't really super interesting. It was much more interesting to just absorb what was happening naturally. So after a couple of door slams and throwing some object around, we were just like, well, that's not really that's not really how the power plant wants to be heard, I think. So we after a while we just we kind of just sat down and just observed.
So Chris, maybe could you describe what the sort of natural acoustic in that space is like? Is there any reverb, or is it actually so big that it's dead?
No, it's not dead at all. It was horribly alive in a very dark way. I mean, I think it's one of the strangest spaces I've ever been invited to go and record. And it had a presence. It had which, of course, that was the thing that Hildur and Sam captured so beautifully in the score. It had this layer, this patina, this ambient background, and which we were able to collect by using a surround sound system. So we used this spatial audio recording system to capture a 360 horizontal sound field, which Hildur and Sam were able to manipulate in post-production. So we could soak up all these sounds. And from experience, one of the best ways to achieve that is just to back the microphones off as far as possible. And these were, I think the first place we went to was the reactor hall, famous places, famous scenes from the series. And this is sort of a football field sized space with a very high roof. And it was Soviet, I hesitate to use the word design, but it was this Soviet built thing, which had no nod at all to aesthetics. And I say it had this remarkable and as far as I was aware, unique acoustic everywhere we went, which was then, everywhere had a signature sound. So the turbine hall, as Hildur and Sam know, had a very special sound. The pump room, all scenes, powerful scenes from the film with powerful individual scores for each scene. The corridors, the actual reactor hall themselves, all had signature sounds. And so it was a case of absorbing that and finding the sweet spots to gather that material, to gather a palette of sounds for Hildur and Sam to use in post.
And obviously, you were not able to be in the Ukraine, you were not able to be in the Chernobyl station, but clearly there was something, I guess, about this place being a sort of historical fellow traveler, or, technologically similar, or it seemed to carry some of the emotional impact that Chernobyl itself had, because you clearly, all three of you were emotionally affected by being in this.
It was, Chris, it was exactly the same. It was the same model. It was the same reactor as the one at Chernobyl. It was built more or less at the same time. It actually had a nuclear engineer got in touch with me after the Warsaw performance to say, did you know that the plant in Ignalina suffered from exactly the same problem that made Chernobyl go horribly wrong? They managed to cure it, but failed to pass on the treatment across to Ukraine. So it was a twin station to Chernobyl. So as far as we were aware, and it had the same acoustics, the same feel, that space, very hard to describe, but beautifully conveyed in the score, that presence, that monstrous presence that made you want to look over your shoulder most of the time.
Yeah, and it's like the scale of these, that this building that's just so, it had such a huge impact, like these endless corridors, like kilometers and kilometers of corridors that just went on and on. And when you just imagine, after having read the script and I know what the scenario was going to be like, and you just imagine these people running for their lives through these corridors and trying to figure what's happening, figure out what's happening. It's just, it really made a huge impact on us, because you basically have to have a month of training to be able to even be allowed to go by yourself through a small part of this building. It was enormous.
Yeah, we found ourselves on the 27th floor in a room that, without any pillars or supports in this room, it's, when they're saying it was something like, the turbine hall, it's like these huge overhead cranes, and you're on the 27th floor and it opens up beneath you and tumbles down to something like -10 or something like this. And there's 2,000 people still working there at all points, deconstructing this object and scanning it for radiation and pulling it apart. And people that spend, even in the deconstruction phase, their whole working careers just pulling this object, this sort of artifact apart, just to make sure that it's safe enough, and just pulling it and pulling it and pulling it. And the sense of scale and people's, also in regards to time as well, is just really it's daunting, actually.
I think that's a good point of Sam's. It was timeless because, of course, it's windowless.
Yes.
So there is no sense of time, just this vast scale. I mean, you could be on a spaceship somewhere, just floating out, because it was like nowhere else, of course. But having no natural daylight, no clocks, we couldn't take anything in like that. So it was quite disorienting in that respect. And so, and that was one of the things I'm sure we were all hoping to capture in that sound, that dreadful sense of space and timelessness, but, waiting for something dreadful to happen.
So you started with this kind of artistic impulse that you needed to go to the physical location, but it sounds that you actually came back with far more than you could have dreamed of in terms of material and inspiration for the next phase, which was to edit and construct the score out of this. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you having amassed this kind of wealth of material, then the harder work starts. You've got to try and edit and structure it. So how did you think about it in terms of spaces?
I think so. I mean, it was a really interesting process, because it was a little bit like treasure hunting, because you have this, because like you said, we went in there and we didn't really know what to expect. I mean, it might have been for nothing, like this whole trip, and it was just like, well, I feel like it's important to understand the space, and then God knows what's going to happen. But then afterwards, like after we captured all of these recordings, then the kind of the real detailed treasure hunting began, because then I'd listen really intensely through like basically every single minute of the recordings, and then pinpoint like sounds or material that could possibly be molded into like musical clay. So I would sit with headphones and then just like on hour 7 minutes 35 and 30 seconds there's like and I'm like
I love that.
Like Sam would need to go and like surgically remove any like any extra sounds around it. And we treasure hunt through like all of the material basically through like microscopic listening. And then like after that process was done, then we started like molding stuff into making clay out of it, and then it was just like layer after layer of just like working with it, molding it, and it was a really quite a long process, and because it was like extracting all this material, which took a long time, and then starting to make music out of it, which also took a long time to just like find ways to work with such abstract material in a way that worked musically, but also dramatically with the series, and then of course like the kind of normal process of working on a production where you have to kind of find the right way for everyone in the production, like the writer, the producers, and on all of this, like then the dialogue starts with
the negotiation.
Yeah, the negotiation starts, and when someone starts and they're like, I want to make the whole score out of this like nuclear power plant. It took a while to find the right way into that, but thankfully, we came in so early, and so we had quite extended time, and everyone was quite patient and believed in the process, so I was allowed to kind of run wild for quite a long time before they said like, okay, now we have to make this work.
I think it's probably also worth talking about like the process of that treasure hunting as such. At the beginning, we didn't set out with this idea necessarily of being like, okay, let's make the entire score out of this nuclear reactor. That only, it wasn't quite so dogmatic. I think if we'd have found that, okay, well, these sounds work really well, but perhaps some more kind of traditional methods support the score in a way and work with the picture, then we would have, of course, worked in that way. But as you started to, tease these really special sounds and really, really massage them, I think, you were talking about clay, and I think the sculpture analogy works really well. You're really constantly refining these bits and zooming in and dragging out and using as many different, the techniques, it took a long time, and then also being like, okay, now we need to create a layer to support this, and realizing that you need something that perhaps feels more conventional, like an organ sound, but you've made 80% of the stuff you've got in front of you is made from a nuclear reactor, so you don't want to reach to an organ. So you're like, okay, how can I? And also,
as soon it was very interesting, because you also have to, when you work on a project like this, you have to really listen to how the stuff is, because at this point we had picture, like we had images, and you have to really start to listen to, okay, how does this respond to the picture, and how does, for example, every time we try to work with like regular instruments or percussion or anything that was kind of the kind of instrumental sound world, it just did not work at all. The picture, it just like it was really clear. I think that this material wanted to be real, like it didn't want to be just like a dramatization of these events, and they wanted to be somehow like factual rather than fictional.
So I think you just said 80%. That sort of random number in terms of the total of the total composition that came from those sound recordings, or is that a kind of?
No, it's 100%.
So yeah, well, that's what I thought.
Yeah, no, because there's my voice as well, because there which actually does play a rather big role in the score as well. Because there was like the you have the space and the radiation with which these recordings represent. But then, of course, like, you know, the within the story and potentially like the kind of the real tragedy is the human element of the story, and that it's like a human error that caused it, and of course like human lives that were lost, and so that was represented with my voice.
Yeah, so you could set your performance against this kind of inhuman scale and atmosphere, and have this kind of small presence in the middle of it.
Exactly.
But I think it is also worth adding that all of your voice recordings are going through an impulse response of you. We made these like pretty questionable impulse responses, like chucking I think it was like a large ball bearing you found on the floor in the reactor hall.
Yeah.
And you chucked it on the floor, and Chris recorded this, and these became our sort of, we were like, oh, maybe we can make an impulse response out of it.
An impulse response means that you can basically make a sort of reverb out of a room. So basically, if you record like for someone who's listening to this doesn't know what an impulse response is, but basically, so you can play back a recording into a simulation of that room.
Exactly. So Hilda's, though we're recording her in a studio environment, like the recording still is sort of inserted into the world. It's all filtered back through the reactor, and it gave it it was a questionable impulse response, but it gave it a very specific quality, I think, from that.
So there was a way in which you could actually cite Hilda's vocal performances in those spaces.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So the space is really present in that, like every single sound.
Yeah.
And the technique, sort of the practical aspect of that is the thing that I thought worked really well was that I pointed the front side of the microphone away from the source of the sound. So the sound was mostly recorded through the reflections and reverberations of the space. So it was colored by the acoustics of that environment, which I think, you know, gave it that sense of character.
Mm.
So then, at the risk of, this is fascinating. I could talk about this all day because I just love this stuff. But we also need to touch on this live performance, which you have devised, because then you had to obviously revisit this material, which was assembled so carefully to work with the images, and suddenly remove the images and turn it into something that stood alone. And I know that from the outset, it was very clear to you guys that you needed to make the performance a sort of multi-channel experience for the audience. So I'm wondering what your thinking was there and why that seemed so important to you.
Well, I think it was really important that because the recordings themselves are, they are essentially space. They're just capturing space, you know. So it was really important that the concert was a spatialized experience, you know, that is not just like going to a concert hall and having speakers in front of you, but that it's an actual physical, spatial experience. And I think for us, it was, you know, as you can hear, we're all talking about this experience of going in there to record. Like, we wanted the audience to experience something of the sort, you know. So we didn't. It was really clear that we didn't want like visuals to go with it. Like, we didn't want like a video of scenes or something like this, because it kind of takes the eye a little bit too much out of the ears.
Yeah.
You know. So.
Well, you had something better than video because you had these crazy spaces, right?
Exactly. So it became clear that like this was not going to be like a concert piece as such, but that the piece needed to be played in like industrial spaces that you know have the same sort of, you know, or go into the direction of this sort of scale and feeling of you know, abandonment or destruction, or, you know, just like that gives you a sense of, you know, when you come in there and you go like, you know, and that's something that you know, you can only feel through space, you know, through actual space, and also because these are, like, I often refer to this music as like, you know, factual music more than fictional. I think that the space that the performances happened in also needed to be like, factual spaces. And so every space that we've performed this in has had like a really interesting history, and has been like very interesting, a very interesting like industrial space. And sadly, the performance that we were going to do with you was going to be one of the most bombastic ones.
Let's not even talk about it. I'm still mourning. The power station that we were going to use is starting to be demolished next month. So that was a moment in time that the virus took away from us. So we'll move. I mean, what I'm interested in is obviously you had to devise, I guess, a production that would work in lots of different spaces. So I don't know how you were able to sort of think about the piece and the lighting and the sound design and everything, whilst perhaps not knowing exactly what rooms you would actually be in, and wondering how you were able, if at all, to respond to different spaces, or if you devised something that was robust enough to survive contact with any different acoustic or different type of space.
Well, I think the answer to that is actually that we worked with two people that are like particularly excellent, and they're not on this call, but I will give them a shout out, which is Francesco Donadello, who is our sound engineer and performs on stage with us, and also Theresa Baumgartner, who is the lighting wizard, and she performs on stage with us as well. And we sort of all came together and had a talk about what we'd like to realize, and very much said, this needs to be robust and needs to be adaptable to these new spaces. But at the end of it, we'd love an audience to walk in and see a platform in the middle and see, I mean, it's a 10.6 channel PA system, 6 massive subwoofers around the outside of the room, and 10 channels, 6 at ear level, and then another 4 overhead. And this was Francesco's like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? And raise out
when people say that.
Well, no, I mean, this is actually
as a concert promoter.
No, but this is
your worst nightmare.
The great privilege of this show really has been that I think between the 5 of us, we had an idea of like being like, this is really how we'd like to realize this piece. And every single concert promoter that we've had the opportunity to do it with, or would have had the opportunity to do it with this year, has not only said, yes, that sounds great, but has said, ooh, okay, well, how about this? And it's become even, become somehow more than we could have expected. And so yes, planned from the ground up, but somehow realized, which is not so often.
I mean, it's nice, I guess, that each performance opportunity actually introduces a bit of randomness, into it, and so it doesn't become a sort of static, performance at all, because there's always this additional element of atmosphere and space generated by where you physically are.
And that's
exactly, and that's kind of what made it so interesting to go about it this way, because the piece changes with every space, and that's what's so beautiful about the space being like one of the kind of key players of the performance. It's just like, okay, what has this space have to offer? How does it sound? How is it shaped? Like, how are the audience going to be spaced within it, and are they going to, is there going to be a danger of the audience, like, falling into some like massive holes in the ground? Which has been like a genuine concern in a couple of spaces, so it's just like it's kind of, and I think in connection to the process of making this piece, that just seemed to really marry well to the whole idea and the aesthetics and the kind of aliveness of the spatialization, so that was quite exciting for us, I think.
Right.
So now we have a film, thankfully, of one of these performances. So people who weren't able to make it, I think you did one in Krakow, right? There was one in Berlin, one in Warsaw. Was that those the only 3? So did I miss one?
We had a whole year of fun planned, as did everyone. And obviously Yes, 2020 happened.
Yeah. But we have at least salvaged something from the wreckage in the form of this amazing concert film, which we're chatting because this film now exists, and people will be able to see it from Friday, I think. And I guess the question is nothing. I mean, I came and saw the performance in Krakow, and it was unbelievable and incredibly powerful, just as a physical experience as well as an emotional one. But the film is never going to replicate that, but I feel it does capture something of that experience, and actually the weird sparsity of the audience and the kind of the contrast between that and the immensity of the space, and you guys kind of isolated in the center, actually in a way says something about the experience of this year as well as the experience of Chernobyl and of the whole thing. It kind of becomes a really rather affecting document. I don't know how you feel about the end result of the film.
I think it's a perfect, as you say, Chris, perfect performance for the times. It felt, when we were in Warsaw, it felt right that people were widely spaced apart and were in this huge space. It was, I won't say it was comfortable, but it felt, it sort of hit a mark in time and brought the series, the soundtrack, the score, the performance right up to date with what was happening all around us.
And also, I think it just deals with a lot of that. I think what we're going through today and what people went through, like right after this explosion, like they're quite related. Like this fear and this uncertainty, like on a global scale, and it's like all people are really put under the same hat. And is it like back in those days, like I hear from so many people in Germany, like, is it safe to eat these mushrooms? Like, is it safe to go out in this type of rain? Like, are we able to do this? Are we able to travel to there? And it's a lot of the same things that we're dealing with today. Are we like too close? Am I allowed to hug this person? Am I allowed to go into this space? Like, am I going to be safe? There's a lot of turbulence that comes with this fear that I think is of the same nature that we're dealing with today, which I think is just a very good reminder of how important it is to revisit an historical event like this and keep in mind what it meant to us as a for the human race, and what we need to learn from it, and how important it is not to forget it. Because I think like the younger generations, when the series came out, they're like, oh, I had no idea that this even happened, and I think that's kind of the power of something, a project like this today. I think this kind of international outreach, it can serve as a good reminder of like, wait a minute, I think it's important that this is not forgotten, and this I think is a good it was an interesting connection, I think.
Yeah.
We've been chatting for more than half an hour, so we need to think about coming to an end. We invited fans to ask a couple of questions. And I've actually got a long list of questions, which unfortunately we can't go through them all. But although we have covered, I'd like to say, quite a lot of the topics that people asked about. I've got a couple of questions, one for Hildur and one for all three of you. Firstly, Hildur, Vimal Raj wrote in and said, I read an interview with you where you said, quote, I'm always drawn to darker narratives more than lighter ones, though my personality is light. He says, if that's the case, how were you able to compose dark narratives like Chernobyl and the Joker and make them so convincing?
Well, I think it's kind of, I get this question a lot, actually, because people are very often surprised, when they either know me and then hear my music, or vice versa. Then they say like, you can write that, you can't write music like that.
Baby Shark.
So I think that's one of the most asked questions for me and my whole career as a musician. But I think, I think it's kind of, I can kind of compare it to where I come from, for example, which is Iceland. I come from Iceland, and that's a country of great extremities, and the light and the darkness are probably the kind of most obvious example of like how extreme these contrasts are, because it's like pitch dark half of the year and like broad daylight 24 hours the other half of the year. And I think that, just like the seasons, we do have this light and the darkness, and so I am in kind of storytelling and in narratives. I guess I'm rather drawn to the darker side of the emotional spectrum, maybe because my daily spectrum is rather like cheerful and bright. But I think the people that share a household with
they may have a different perspective.
They're probably pretty grateful for that.
It's true. I'm really glad you don't have a personality that sounds.
That would be tricky. Okay, so just one other one. This is from Brandon Baker, who just asks if all three of you could name some of your favorite film scores that obviously are not your own. I don't know if there are any recommendations you'd like to close with for other things that you'd like to point people at, or not.
Favorite film scores?
Sorry, I should have warned you about that.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing?
Exactly. Well, I think one of my favorite film scores in the later years, I think I can safely say, is probably Birdman. I really loved that. I love that film. I mean, I love Inarito and I love that score. And I think it's it's always very. I find it very kind of exciting that when people are working in different ways with a form that's has kind of specific direction towards it, so I think it's quite interesting to see people experiment with forms like film scoring. And I think that it just was a really excellent score with like such great sense of exploration and curiosity and fun and experimentation. And I think that's what I think that is as an audience member just like very fun to experience. When people are going down the middle of the road, but they're just like, wait a minute, what if like all the emotions of the score is just like drums, it works so well. Right, that's one of my favorite.
Okay.
Killing of a Sacred Deer, that's the one that pops up for me, which is all I think it's all needle drops, like it's all like chunks of what is it? It's like all like sonatas and all this crazy stuff, but it just at the same time it just has this most like unified thread to it. It's like horrible. That film just makes me want to like kind of leave the room a little bit. So that one pops up. Yes, I like that one.
Okay. Do you want to throw one in, Chris?
Yeah, well, a few. I mean, I go back to sort of, I'm that sort of age and style. I'm a big fan of the work of Walter Murch. So, I mean, the Conversation, Francisco Coppola, in terms of soundtrack, not just score. I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful things about Chernobyl. It's not just a score, it's a soundtrack to a film. And so the Conversation, Apocalypse Now. And in terms of a soundtrack, De Grosse is still about a year, the life of a monastery, Carthusian monastery, which is really beautiful invocation of a soundtrack.
Fantastic. Well, thanks to all three of you, Hildur, Sam, Chris, for a really insightful conversation. I hope everyone watching enjoyed that. I certainly did. Oh, Sam's waving his finger. Do you want to say something?
I just want to, considering all of our conversations today, Chris, say thank you very much to you, and also thank you very much to Matt and Goss here at Unsound, and Zoe and Theresa and everyone involved in making the video. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
You're
Chris.
so well brought up. It's excellent.
My parents should be watching. I don't know. I just
So thanks everyone for coming along and watching. I hope you found that engaging and interesting. I definitely did, and I hope you enjoy the film when you get to see it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Chat soon, guys.
Cheerio.